Welcome to Brooker Ceramics, and it's day 34 of learning how to throw on a potter's wheel. This week I've been inspired by Florian Gadsby and wanted to make some nice angular shaped vases. You can see here I really worked hard to get those contour lines nice and straight with a flat top. I've also spent a bit of time working in the bottom, creating that nice thin delicate foot, and then stamping in my maker's mark. I definitely see this vase being used to house, those kind of like dry grasses and pom-poms that stick up, and it being that kind of ornamental decorative thing for a table or a windowsill. I'm probably going to let this dry out so that it can go bone dry, and then fire and glaze it in either like a dark green or a black. I think that'll look quite nice. So this video is really talking you through all of those steps from weighing out the clay through to throwing it and then trimming it up later. I particularly enjoy the trimming process, refining it from that kind of nice organic shape into this kind of angular form that you can see here. I spent a bit of time just working out my dimensions and sketching everything out, which you can see on my notepad here. And also wrote down the clay amount. So what I'm using here is about 1200 grams of stoneware clay, or 1.2 kilos, and you can see the dimensions on the side and the bottom. So hopefully this is a video you guys will enjoy. Make sure you stay to the end, and don't forget to like and subscribe. So first I'll begin to wedge my clay out and make sure to remove any bubbles before I begin throwing. So now that I've got my ball of clay weighed out, it's time to start throwing it on the wheel. For this shape, I'll be throwing it on a bat because it would be really tall and delicate, and I need to be able to pull it off without deforming the shape. And I'm looking for, I want to cone in centre, open up the clay, and then begin making like a small bowl shape at the bottom. And then begin to bring it up into the tall vessel neck at the top. So I'll zoom you in and we can take a look at that now. One of the first ceramicists that I got into when I was beginning to find an interest in pottery was Florian Gadsby. I really like his angular shapes and forms and the processes that he goes through from start to finish to ensure that his vessels are of the highest quality. And that care and attention to detail is something that I try to replicate throughout every process. So this week I wanted to have a go at trying to replicate that style with some of my own ceramic vases. I really like the angular forms, and where I want to see my style kind of develop over the next few months is a combination of that angular and smooth shapes. So now that I've got the clay ball opened and ready to start pulling, I'm going to, as mentioned before, try and make a bowl shape at the bottom and then pull it up into a tall neck. But first what I need to do is get the walls the right thickness. So I'm going to start pulling it up into just a tall cylinder shape before then coming in and creating the bowl at the bottom of the vessel. So let's take a look. I've learned over the past few months that pulling at this initial stage is really important to set the pot up for success. I try to pull the vessel up with as few movements as possible, keeping it nice and steady and the wheel spinning at a relatively comfortable pace. I found that if I don't pull in a one confident lift, that you end up adding more water to the vessel, and this then weakens the consistency of the clay. This vessel is quite a tall vessel, so I attempted to do 2 pulls before then starting in to roughen the shapes. Now I've got the basic organic form, it's time to come in and define those sharp edges. So for this I'll be using a wooden kidney and just pressing it against the vessel as I work my way up. So let's have a go at that now. Using the wooden kidney, like I am here, to remove the excess slip is one of my more favourite parts of the throwing process. It feels a little bit like trimming, and I think that's why I enjoy it. It's where you can start seeing that rough vessel shape that you've been pulling and forming really start to come into its own. And when I'm throwing these angular shapes, the wooden kidney can really help create those smooth, clean surfaces. And it gives you a bit of an insight into what that final vessel might look like. And I find this really exciting. Removing any excess water is something I often forget when I'm throwing complex vessels. I get so caught up in ensuring it's the right shape or pulling those confident strokes to create the vessel form that I forget to remove any excess water inside of the vessel. And this again is another really important step that is easily overlooked, because if I leave the water in there, the vessel may dry out unevenly over the next few weeks, and this could cause it to crack or deform. So to ensure that the clay dries out nice and consistently, I need to remove any excess from the centre. Finally, coming in, once I've got that rough shape, with that wooden kidney again, to burnish the sides and get it looking nice and sharp. The centre wasn't spinning exactly straight, so I just used a little pin to remove any excess clay and get a nice clean circular surface on the inside. I'll come in throughout the trimming process later on in a few days and finish that edge up, and it'll look nice and crisp. So now that I've got this final shape roughed in, it's time to set it aside for it to dry out with the hard, and then I'll come back in and trim it up. Given the thickness of the base, I'm also going to want to flip it after a couple of days so that the base can dry out nice and evenly too. So I'm going to set this aside and we'll come back and trim it all up. So a couple of days have passed now and the ceramic vessel is leather hard. What I want to do is score a wire again underneath here, flip the vessel, and I'm going to wrap the bottom so that it doesn't dry out any further. And this will allow the base to dry out so I can carve into it nice and cleanly. So we're going to head over to my workstation now and we're going to flip the vessel and set it aside for the final stage of drying. I found this part quite stressful. It was the first time that I'd really flipped a long, tall vessel like this to dry. And I was really conscious that the neck or the joints could buckle or warp. So I was panicking that after all that effort of throwing and getting it the perfect shape, that I'd come back and all the pots would be slumped over. But thankfully I had let the clay dry out just enough so it was nice and leather hard. And you can see here I'm now attaching the bag so that the base has time to dry out. I'd usually put it in my clay container, but the vessel was actually too tall to fit inside there to dry out evenly. And so I opted for this bag method, which worked out really well. So again, I'm going to leave it for a couple more days now to dry out, and hopefully it'll all be an even dryness. So a few days later, and my vessel is nice and leather hard. I have actually wrapped this thin area in some plastic to let it dry out more evenly so that the base can catch up. The base is still a tiny bit softer than the rest of the body, but it's in a good place now and we can begin trimming it up. So I can remove the plastic, hopefully, there we go. And separately I've made a chuck, so the chuck will allow me to place the vessel into it like that and trim up the base, and then I can flip it and I'll place it on the wheel and do the final trimming. So let's head over to the pottery wheel and take a look at that now. So here's the chuck that I was just mentioning, and what it will allow me to do is place the vessel in like that. I'll have to stick it down with a bit of clay and then I can trim up the base. So what I want to start off with doing is just giving this a light trim down and getting everything sorted, and then I'll flip it. We're now moving into my favourite stage of the throwing process, and that's trimming up the vessel. As you can see, I'm trying to centre everything so it will spin nice and vertically. This is something that I'm still trying to learn, and often my vessels kind of wobble still when I'm trimming, and this can cause those really sharp lines to not quite join up nicely. So I try to spend as much time as I can ensuring that the clay is spinning centrally on that wheel. Once I've got it in there, I'll add some blobs of clay, and that'll just hold it more securely to the wheel as I trim. Watching the burrs of clay or little worms kind of slowly peel off the surface of the clay is really therapeutic. And you can take a vessel that you spent some time throwing that has a nice shape really to that next level. By removing sections of clay over and over again, slowly eating down into the surface, the vessel that you're trying to create, your vision slowly starts to form. I've seen lots of videos where they quickly remove lots of clay all at the same time, and it's very much a production process for them, and I hope that I can get to that stage of confidence. But in the meantime, I do quite enjoy the calm, slow process of chipping away bit by bit of the clay until the shape that I've envisioned at the start of the process slowly starts to form from the mass. You can see here how I'm now attaching the clay into the chuck that I made earlier, and just like before, it's really important that this spins nice and centrally so that the lines that I start to carve in will hold their form and their shape. Trimming in the foot again is another area I really enjoy, but this is where, when you've maybe not centered the vessel too well, it starts to become really obvious because the different areas of the foot have different thicknesses. So what I like to do is actually throw the bottom half of the vessel and the foot itself slightly thicker, and that gives me a bit more lee room to come in and really get that final vessel shape trimmed in. I can remove more excess clay despite it being spinning off center, and that will then slowly center the vessel itself. And you can see with the foot, the more I begin to remove, because I'm holding that tool really still and as tight as I can, it will slowly remove the excess away, and that foot itself will become much more even and consistent across the board. A nice little touch that I've begun to add to my pieces is adding my maker's mark. I got this off an Etsy store, and they were really good. I think this mark is slightly too big, so probably going to go for something a bit smaller. Once all those pieces are done, the final stage is to just come in with a wet sponge and soften some of those edges, remove any pieces of clay, and just give it that final tidy up. And this just takes those forms to that next level to ensure that it has a really clean finish and it's ready to be fired. So I'll set it aside for a few more days to dry out bone dry, and here's the final piece. So I hope you enjoyed this process. I really enjoyed making it, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this.